Alrighty, this is going to be part 6 of our series in the book of Proverbs. Part 6. And we're going to be in chapter 6, and we're going to start here in verse 1 through 5. Let's go ahead and turn there. And we're not going to make it all the way through chapter 6 this morning. We're going to have to, got several big subjects going on here. I know in the last message we went through two chapters because there's a lot of review. But it says here in verse 1 through 5, "My son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself. When thou art come unto the hand of thine friend, go, humble thyself, make sure thy friend. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thy eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler." So here in this passage here, a lot of times today we don't use the word surety anymore. That's an old English word for basically going into contract or debt with somebody or having a business deal with somebody. And I want to give you the 1828 Webster's Dictionary definition of this word to better understand it, because a lot of people will glance over this passage here and not really understand what it's talking about. But it was a law term back in the 16, 17, 1800s. It says here, quote, "In law, one that is bound with and for another, one who enters into a bond or recognizes to answer for another's appearance in court, or for his payment of debt, or for the performance of some act, and who, in case of the principal debtor's failure, is compelled to pay the debt or damages, a bondman, a bail." So basically, in other words, it's very similar to what we call co-loan today, where you go and you sign your name on a loan with somebody else, and the agreement is their verbal agreement that they're going to pay, but deep down, and they do that because they usually have bad credit or no credit, deep down, if they fail, which happens often, it falls back on the person who co-signed with them. And we could paraphrase this passage this way: "My son, if thou go into debt with someone like a friend, or if thou made a deal with a zor," that's the stranger there, zor, stranger. So it's saying here that it's bad to go into debt with even a friend or a stranger, someone you don't know, or someone you are not familiar with. You have snared or trapped yourself with your own words. Give no sleep to your eyes or slumber to thine eyelids until you've worked off the debt. If I were to paraphrase it, that's kind of what it would sound like. So basically, if you are in debt, if you've co-signed with somebody, which is even worse, go into dealings with somebody. And I really don't have to explain why. I'm sure we've known somebody who co-signed for somebody and it went wrong, went bad. They didn't pay it, and then you find out years later that you now have bad credit because you co-signed for someone and they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, or whatever it may be. It happens all the time. And it says here, if you do it with a friend or a stranger. So it's bad either way. Now, going into business dealings, and I think this can apply over to business dealings as well, with a stranger, that's just unwise. I mean, you're going into business with somebody, you have no idea who they are. They're a stranger to you. They're a zor, stranger. This isn't speaking of a racial stranger, but it could be applied to that as well. But in other words, it's saying if you're stupid enough, unwise enough to do this, get it paid off and taken care of as quick as possible. Give no sleep to your eyes or slumber to thy eyelids until you've worked it off, basically. And in the Bible, debt is not ever considered a sin. It's not a sin to go into debt. Now, usury is a sin for two brethren to commit usury with one another. And usury is where, you charge, you loan someone $5 and you demand $7 back. That's usury. Now, what often people don't understand is you can actually, biblically, in biblical law, you can do that with a stranger. So someone that's not your brethren, if you loan them money, you can use usury in that instance, but not against your own brethren. But going into debt is not a sin, but it's always condemned as being unwise, something that if you have to, you need to get out of it as soon as possible. And of course, the American people today, they've taken that as a challenge, to go into as much debt as possible rather than the other way around. And there's a very vivid illustration given here in verse 5 that is often used. It says here, deliver thyself, and we're speaking of debt, deliver thyself as a roe, which is like a deer, from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. The New American Standard puts it this way. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So we're using hunting language here. So basically what the Scripture is saying is, if you're in debt, you're in a dangerous situation. You're like a gazelle out on the prairie that's being chased by a lion or a cheetah, or being hunted by a man. You need to deliver yourself from that situation as quick as possible. If you've ever watched Dave Ramsey, he's always used this illustration because he'll have a video of a cheetah chasing a gazelle. And he made the point that the video they had of the gazelle getting away was very hard to find. And I actually tried to do this. It's hard finding a video of a gazelle not getting eaten by a cheetah. They're out there, but they're hard to find. I could not find one to use as an illustration, but that's what it's describing here. It's describing a deer out on the prairie, or a gazelle, in danger, in immediate danger from a hunter, a cheetah, a lion. And that is what's being used as an illustration for debt and needing to get out of it, how urgent it is. And it says here, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So in South United States terms, this could be a turkey in the hand of a turkey hunter, or the turkey in the hand of a coyote. They're in immediate danger from getting shot or getting eaten, or both. So here's some things to ponder on here that I came up with. It's just an illustration on how bad things are here in America today. And I know we understand a lot of this, but it's an illustration that has to be pointed out. And then I have another illustration I'm going to show you on why it's this bad, I think, in America. But it says here, this is from a report I read that was published last year, that Americans own $986 billion on just credit card debt. 11.92 trillion on mortgages, 1.55 trillion on vehicle loans, and 1.60 trillion on student loans. And then I have the breakdown of ages, but it really doesn't matter. But the point here is most Americans, and I'm going to throw Christian Americans in here because I would say most of these people, the majority, identify as some kind of Christian, more than likely. They do not believe what the Bible teaches when it comes to this fact that you're in immediate danger when you're in this kind of situation, and you need to get out as soon as possible. And when I was doing this research, I came across this article, which I think is an example of the reasoning why Americans have no problem with debt, unfortunately, when we did not that long ago. I mean, as a people, we didn't like debt. We wanted to get out of it as quick as possible. We wanted to settle up our interest before we died and things like that. Now, people don't care. They just take a loan out for whatever. They swipe their credit cards, and they just keep doing it until... I had one guy I worked with. He said that he just kept swiping until it's full. And he said, when it's full, I don't buy that. That's kind of the mentality. But in this article that I read, it's from 2019, called The Debt Debate. And it was on a Christian website. And it says here, they surveyed 425 churches, asking each church how much debt the church had. Now, not the people, not the congregants, but how much debt the church had. And the article reported that out of the 425 churches, so this is a very small survey. Keep that in mind, very small. There's more than 425 churches in the handful of parishes that just surround us. But it says here they surveyed that they had $849 million, 301,519. So almost 100. That'd be this $849 million in debt between 425 churches. Now think about that. Now, I would be willing to bet they have a Bible of some translation that pretty much translates this passage we just read pretty clearly. I mean, you can look at the ESV, the New American Standard, the King James, New King James, and it all translates this passage here of debt being dangerous, but yet out of these 425 churches, they have $849+ million in debt. That's insane. The average debt for the so-called mega church in this survey was more than $9.1 million compared to only $111,600 for a handful of the small churches that were in this survey. And this was only 425 churches. Now think about that. I mean, and I mentioned in the last message, I watched a clip from Dave Ramsey. A guy had called in and wanted to know what Dave Ramsey's thoughts were on the church that he attended. Wanted all the senior members to co-sign on a loan for $8.3 or $8.1 million for just one church. And of course, Dave Ramsey quoted in Proverbs and said that he would expect them to follow the Bible and that he would disagree with it. And I agree. But that's only 425 churches. And I imagine there's never been a survey done from even one state full of churches, because usually that kind of information they don't want to be broadcast out to the masses, but that is a lot of debt. Not including all the money they can get in too. So they are spending it as fast as they're getting it in. I want to read a few passages of what the Bible has to say about debt that should be obvious to all these churches that go into debt for new parking lots, new entertainment, gymnasiums, or whatever it may be, whatever they go into debt for. I highly doubt it's for the advancing of the kingdom. But it says here, Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7, you want to turn there? It says here, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." I imagine this is in their Bibles as well. The borrower is a slave to the lender. So these churches are slaves to their debtors. Now let's go to Romans, over the New Testament, Romans chapter 13, verse 8. And he says this, Paul says, "Owe no man anything, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." So he's saying, owe no man anything. Now, like I said, I'm not saying debt is sin. Debt's unwise. Usury is sin. But he says, owe no man anything. That's good. It's good not to owe anyone anything. It's much more peaceful that way. You have much more freedom. Because if you're in debt with somebody, you're a servant to them. You're enslaved to them in some degree. And most people have no problem with that in today's society until the loans are called and they're in trouble. But that's a biblical principle. When you borrow money from somebody, you're a servant, a slave to them. And you need to get out as quick as possible, just like a gazelle out on the prairie running from a lion or a cheetah. You're in immediate danger. Now let's go to Proverbs chapter 22, verse 26 through 27. It says this concerning people who would take a debt out and have no way or plan of paying it back, or no intention in paying it back. Now, I've met people that would take a debt out and they have no intention of ever paying it back. Or perhaps they take it out and then they decide they don't want to pay it back. Or perhaps they take it out and they get mad at the guy and they don't want to take it. They don't want to pay him back. Whatever. This is what the Bible has to say. Be not thou one of them that striketh hands. So this is like making an agreement. Or of them that are sureties for debt. So you co-sign for somebody, it's your debt. You're liable, legally, biblical law liable to pay it back. If thou hast nothing to pay, why should he take away thy bed from under thee? So the point here is if you're making deals and you have no way of paying for it, have no plan of paying for it, no way, no income to pay for it, you don't need to make the deal. So if someone comes to you and wants you to co-sign on a loan, which I kind of have trouble with this verse because for one, if you don't have the money to pay the debt back, you don't need to be taking the debt out in the first place. There is that kind of issue. But I think this is talking about interest as well. So if you go into debt with somebody, surety, and you have nothing of value to pay it back, nothing of substance, then you shouldn't be going into it anyway. You don't have no income. And you're not a good person if you do that, according to what's going on here. It's unwise. Now let's go to Psalm 37:21. Psalm 37:21. And it says this concerning one who would borrow money and not pay it back as well. It says here, the wicked borroweth and payeth not again, but the righteous show mercy and giveth. The New American Standard renders this verse, the wicked borroweth and does not pay back, but the righteous is gracious and gives. So a wicked person would be one that would borrow money and have no intentions in paying it back. I don't like the credit card companies, but I've heard of people saying, well, I'll just charge it and not pay it back. Well, that's not a biblical thing to do. Yeah, they're charging usury, but it's still a debt that you took out and that you're liable for. So it's wicked. And it says here, but the righteous is gracious and gives, or the righteous have mercy and giveth. So there's some charity there. Now let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43 through 44, concerning how debt is described as a curse. How debt is described as a curse for God's people. And it says here, the stranger that is within the strangers that is within thee shall get up above thee very high. This is the stranger that is a racial stranger. And thou shalt come down very low. So they're going to get above you as a curse, and you're going to go down really low. He, the racial stranger, shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. So he's going to lend to you. You're going to go in debt to him, because you're going to be a slave to him. But you're not going to have anything to lend to him. And thou shalt not lend to him, and he shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Or in other words, the dirty end of the animal. Nobody wants to be the tail. Nobody wants to be the tail end of a cow. I don't know anyone who wants to be the head end of a cow either, but it's much better than the tail end. This is being described as a curse. And if you read up at the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 28, it has a blessing is one that can lend to others. So if you are taking debts out, it's a curse. If you're lending to others, if you're able to lend to others, it's a blessing. So it makes me wonder what Bible these 425 churches were reading, because it wasn't these passages. I don't know what their Bible says, but debt is a negative thing. It's something that if we get into it, and sometimes we have to, because we're in situations that we have to, we need to get out as quick as possible and be serious about it. Now let's go back to Proverbs chapter 6, and we're going to talk about Christian work ethic, which is linked to finances and economics and things of that nature, because the Bible teaches a strong work ethic, and we're to work hard. It says this in verse 6 through 11. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man. Now, what is being said here is directly connected with debt, obviously. If you have debt and you're not working, that's a problem. Or if you're lazy, often lazy people who don't work, they ended up in debt. In fact, if I've known more people who worked nothing at all, they had trouble holding down a job, they had more debt than people that did work. Because they're lazy, they're slugger, they need resources from somewhere. The sad part is not long ago, nobody would loan someone like that money because they knew they weren't going to get any of their money back. Now they loan it without even knowing anything about a person, which is insane. And they do that for bondage, by the way, because then they've got them. They can hold to it, they can send them to the collection agencies, and they can start sucking as much as they can dry. And unfortunately, people like that usually have more than one place that they're in debt to. James Fawcett Brown, in his commentary, said this concerning this passage. It says here, the provident slugger usually wants sureties or debt. Hence, such are advised to industry by the ant's example. So, in other words, the writer of Proverbs here is going down to the ant and saying we need to look at the ant as an example for hard work, not being a slugger. I've never seen ants just sitting around, hanging out, doing no work while they're... I wish some of them would, actually. It'd be, especially with fire ants. People in the South will know what I'm talking about. It'd be nice if they took a couple days off, but God made them not to. That they are very productive, very have lots of industry minded. I don't know how you would say that, but they're very productive. And Matthew Henry, in his commentary, he had to say this, which I thought was interesting concerning this passage. It says here, the master he is sent to school to go to the ant, to the bee, as so is in the Septuagint, man is taught more than the beast of the earth, and made wiser than the fowls of heaven, and yet so is so degraded that he may learn wisdom from the meanest insects and to be shamed by them. And I thought that was a good quote, because what he's saying is he's saying, we go to school, we're so smart, we can do all these things, but then some of us are so degraded that we have to go to an ant to learn from the ant. Think about that. Or the honeybee, which some Septuagint translations uses a honeybee as an example, according to Matthew Henry, although I looked for that and I couldn't find what he was talking about. So either way, honeybees are really good examples as well. They are very productive. They're good protectors. They are always working, and much like the ant. And it's to our shame when we have to go to a bug to understand the simple thing of that we don't need to be a slugger. We don't need to be lazy. Let's go to Colossians chapter 3 real quick concerning Christian work ethic. I will admit I was kind of chuckling about this verse yesterday as Roddy and I were doing ditch digging for the church building here. But it says here, Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, and whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. So what that principle's teaching is whatever you do, if you're a ditch digger, if you're a construction worker, if you are a salesman, if you do construction, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. We're to do it in such a way that is pleasing to God. And the way I kind of think about it is if I'm doing something, if I'm working with leather, if I'm doing a job for somebody, landscaping, mowing, some kind of job for somebody, I need to do it in such a way, an attitude, in a productive manner that it's almost like I'm working for God, because I am. Because we're to be a good example. Now, just as a side note, something that popped in my head, I think I talked about this last week. In Matthew chapter 5, we don't have to turn there, but I'm going to turn there real quick. I'm going to read you a passage. Matthew chapter 5, verse 15. It says here, "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and giveth it light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Is a Christian work ethic a good work? Yeah, it's a very good work. In fact, it's a rare one. So that would fall under this. So when Jesus is saying, have a good light, be light unto the world and salt unto the earth, and do your good works, that includes a great Christian work ethic. And I've worked with a lot of people that had no work ethic, zero. In fact, nowadays it's often joked about, just showing up to work is half the battle. I mean, you can almost take over the company if you just show up to work on time. And that's hard. But that's not even a work ethic. That's just being punctual. But I take it back. It's a work ethic for somebody. Some people, they have trouble doing that. But it's a Christian work ethic. It's something that we're to be an example to, and people notice it real quick. At least I've noticed that when I work for people. You show up and you do the job, and they're amazed because so many people don't do it. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4, concerning the slack hand or someone who's lazy. And I'm driving this home because it's just so important, because I don't think a whole lot of churches and pastors preach on this, because obviously we have a big problem in our land today. And you know, a lot of people, they push, you need to go to college, you need to do this, you need to do that. First, those people need to learn how to work, and most of them don't know how to work. And that's why you end up with so many people, and I've known people that went and spent lots of money, usually in debt, on a college education, and get out and they can't even find an entry-level job, and then when they get it, they can't hold it. I mean, I knew one fellow that he had like $25,000, $30,000 in student loans, and that's small compared to most. And when he got out, he has trouble finding a job that wasn't minimum wage. And I think he had a business degree and a bunch of other things. Now, he eventually got out of that, but he had a work ethic, but he'd spent all these years in school and then got out and couldn't find a job. And his work ethic could have been a little better, but still. Says this in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. "He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, that dealeth with a slack hand. But the hand of a diligent maketh rich." Let me read that again. "He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich." So what this is talking about is a slack hand as in sloppy, lazy. Just an expression used throughout the Bible. Proverbs chapter 12, if you want to turn there, verse 11 says this concerning working your own land and not following after, and have what I would interpret in this passage as get-rich-quick schemes. People that want to get rich quick, but they don't want to put in the work for it. The Bible does not teach get-rich-quick schemes. It doesn't. I mean, that's not saying someone can't buy a piece of land and strike oil on it and get rich, but I'm talking about these little schemes that people come up with that, you're going to make $1 million in 6 months if you do, usually selling this kind of pyramid scheme product or something like that. But this is what the Bible has to say. "He that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that followeth vain persons is void of understanding." The Brenton Septuagint translates this passage this way. "He that tilleth his own land shall be satisfied with bread." So, in other words, he that worketh his own land, produces food, he's going to have food. "But they that pursue vanities are void of understanding. He that enjoyeth himself in a banquet of wine shall leave dishonor in his own strongholds." So that where I get that idea of get-rich-quick schemes is here, but they that pursue vanities, things that are not in reality, are void of understanding. Rather than, the contrast is being work hard, work your own land, and produce, rather than people that produce vanities that are just trying to get rich quick. Another principle of Christian work is in Exodus chapter 35, verse 2. Let's turn there. This is one a lot of people overlook, I think, because the Bible gives instructions for the Christian to work 6 days and rest 7. And a lot of people, if they have a 4-day week job or 2-day week job, they'll work those 2s and they'll do nothing for the rest of the time. And I'm not talking about job, but being productive, working your land or around your house or whatever. But it says this concerning the Christian working 6 days and then resting on the 7th. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day there shall be to you a holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whosoever doeth work therein shall be put to death. That's how serious it was. So God wanted you to rest 6 days and rest the 7th. Work 6 days, rest 7, which is a good deal. I've known people that took no days off. They had a full-time job Monday through Tuesday and then worked Saturday and Sunday and then started over. I worked with a guy, when I worked with him, I worked with him on the weekends. That was his second job. He never took a day off. I don't know his situation. I don't know, maybe he was doing as the Proverbs was instructing, and don't let any slumber or sleep hit your eyes until this debt's done. I don't know. But I do know that when you don't rest on that 7th day, your body starts breaking down. I know for me, from my experience, because I fought this for a while because I just didn't have time to rest on that 7th day. Whatever work I did on that 7th day was very unproductive. And then as time went on, those other 6 days became very unproductive. I didn't sleep good. I didn't work good. I didn't do nothing good. We were required to rest that 7th day. And that's part of the Christian work ethic too. And truly rest and reset. And if you think about it, in the way God created the heavens, we also are given a rest in the winter too. Because man, unlike today, they went to sleep when the sun went down and woke up when the sun came up. You have longer days in the summer, so you'd work harder in the summer. And then we almost have a type of Sabbath in the winter because the days get shorter, and obviously you would rest more. And we do rest more. May not rest as more now with unnatural lights and things like that, but God gave us that if you think about it. The sun, moon, and stars to give us that rest. And then there's other appointed times in the Scriptures for rest as well. God wasn't greedy and wasn't mean when He was telling men to work for 6 days. He actually was very gracious with the times He told them to rest too. Now let's look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. This is one that is very, very important. I know Denton knows this one. He just may not know it by verse, but he'll know it. It says here concerning work, "For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat." Now, that is a huge biblical principle that's being disobeyed right now in America today, because now the people that don't work, they're rewarded, right? The government sends them a check. I went to Walmart, unfortunately, the other day on the 1st of November, and I found that out the hard way. I get in there and I couldn't move. But the biblical principle is if you have someone that doesn't want to work, you don't feed them. Don't give them a handout. Don't be an enabler. Like if you had a drunk and he's trying to beat alcohol, you don't go give him a pint of whiskey. You're enabling him. And you may not be pouring it down his gullet, but you are enabling him to continue his sin. One that doesn't work, one that's a slugger, one that is slack at hand, if you give him food, if you give him his resources that he needs, that he would otherwise have to go work, you're doing him a disservice. You are hurting him, not helping him. And I've talked to a lot of people that have a hard time with this in today's society, because a lot of times they'll have children who don't want to work, And the parents are well off, so what they want to do is they feed the children. Now, I'm not talking about a gift. I'm not talking about helping them out. I'm talking about full-time income. I talked to one man, it was about a year ago. He called me up and he called me up and wanted to ask my advice on something, and I don't think he particularly liked my advice, and I'll tell you, I was kind of blunt, but the Bible's blunt too. He called me up and he asked me about his son. He had a 30-year-old son who was still at home. He refused to get a job. All he did is play video games all day, all night. I asked him if the son had a girlfriend or something like that, and he said no. He said they're too expensive. He doesn't want a girlfriend. I'm like, all right. And he asked me, he said, what do I do with him? And the first thing I asked, I said, well, how's he eat? He said, well, I feed him. And I said, well, where does he get money? Well, I help him out with money. And my response was, well, you need to give him a time frame to go get a job and get out. It needs to be fairly short. And then if he doesn't obey, kick him out. Take his stuff out on the lawn and leave it next to the dumpster. Now, to me, it may be tough love, but if you have a 30-year-old son who doesn't want to work, who's lazy, you have to do some drastic things. You can't just go in there and soft talk him into going and getting a job. But, the father was feeding this grown man, his son, was feeding his indulgences. He was a sluggard. He was giving the drunk a drink, so to speak. He was enabling him to continue being a sluggard. Why? Because he's at home, he's got video games, he's got his TV, he's got food, he's got everything he needs. Why would I go get a job? And that starts early on. And that's why you got to be so drastic if you're dealing with a 30-year-old man that won't get a job. Kick him out. Why? Because the Bible says, and I quoted this verse to him, if you don't work, you don't eat. Now, let me ask you all a hypothetical question. If you kicked a 30-year-old man out on the street, how long do you think, well, two things are going to happen. He's either going to get a job or he's going to starve to death. How long do you think it will be before he goes and gets a job? Most of the time, he's probably going to get a job. Unless, unfortunately, he moves into the homeless category and he just sits out there with a pan and makes more than most working people. That's a whole other story. But the principle is if you don't work, you don't eat. So in that instance, the biblical thing would be to, hey, son, you need to get out. I'm going to give you X amount of time to get out and go. You're a man now, not a little kid. So the Bible teaches a good work ethic. We need to remember that. Children. Now let's go to Proverbs chapter 6 again, and let's go to verse 12. Verse 12. It says here, a naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a forward mouth, or a perverse mouth. And this is something that we all need to work on. I work on it. I slip up and say things I shouldn't, but like I had mentioned in the last message, there's some people that take this far beyond just saying a bad word. Like I'd mentioned before, I knew one man that I worked with that you could say good morning to him, and he could turn that into some perverse joke. I just quit saying good morning to him, quit talking to him. But some people are that way. And we don't need to be that way. We need to fight against it and bridle the tongue like it talks about in James. Verse 13 and 14 says here, he winketh with his eyes, this naughty person, this wicked man, he winketh with his eyes, he speaketh with his feet, he teacheth with his fingers, forwardness is in his heart, he deviseth mischief continually, he soweth discord. This is a really interesting passage to me because it's speaking of a man here that winketh with his eyes. He's not being up front. He's not being blunt. He's speaking with his eyes. He's speaking with his feet. It almost sounds like he's giving secret signals. And I think there's a point to that. And if you think about all the wicked people today, they have their little symbols, like that. Yeah. For those that don't know, like years ago, I did a video, and I held my hand like this, and I got accused of being the Illuminati, Freemasonry. Someone thought I was a Freemason, which, for the record, nobody in my family has ever been a Freemason as far as I know, going back at least several hundred years. So for them to say that to me, it was hilarious, because I know I can't even think of anybody that is a Freemason that I know, but they didn't. I knew a guy that was, he was, but he was dead. He's dead now. But yeah, I held my hands like this, and it was a secret symbol. I was given messages. But in my defense, I knew nothing about it. I was just holding my hands. So people can also overreact to this. But I don't think that is exactly what is being spoken about here. Yes, evil people today, they give weird signals and weird signs. And our people overreact and act all crazy. Oh, did you see what he did with his hands? It could have been he was just holding his hands like this, like I was. I wasn't given secret Masonic symbols. What I believe is being spoken about here is more dealing with being clear and bold and upfront with your speech and your thoughts, and not being unclear. And I'll show this to you, how I come to this conclusion. But first, I want to read a passage from Matthew Henry and what he said about this passage, and just for some consideration. It says here, quote, "With his eyes, with his feet, with his fingers, he expresses his malice when he dares not to speak out, or some. Or rather, thus he carries on his plot. Those about him whom he makes use of as the tools of his wickedness understand the ill meanings of a wink of his eyes," so secret messages, "a stamp of his feet, the least motion of his fingers. He gives orders for evil doing, and yet would not be thought to do so, but has ways of concealing what he does, and so that he may not be suspected." So we have a person here, a wicked man, who is not upfront with his dealings. He's a fraud. If he's given secret meanings to different people over here for malice or wicked intent, he's a fraud. He's putting on a front. And this goes back to a principle that Jesus spoke about in Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. This is another one I know the boys know, because I've explained this to them because it's very important. And it says here, concerning what Jesus said, Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, "But let your communication be," listen boys, "let your communication be, yeah, yeah, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." Or in other words, let your yeses be yes, your noes be noes, nothing in between. And a lot of people, they'll say, him haul around, and they'll say one thing, and they don't really mean yes or no. They're down the middle. Or they'll say yes and they mean no, or they'll say no and they mean yes. Their yeses aren't yeses, their noes aren't noes. They're unsure of themselves. They don't know what they believe. They don't know what they're doing. They may have secret intents. So you ask a person a yes or no answer. Well, just watch any of the interviews of any of the politicians running for president right now, and ask them when they're asked a hard question, and ask them and watch how long it takes them to go around that question. Their yeses aren't yeses and their noes aren't noes. I listened to an interview the other day, and this applies to all of them. I'm not just picking on Trump. But Trump was being interviewed, and that man cannot answer a direct question without having to go a 40-minute conversation around it and completely miss it. And it's a politician tactic. I mean, they do that. There's an art to saying a lot without saying anything. And Jesus is saying, let your yeses be yes, your noes be noes. Let it be clear. And I've had people that work for me and people that I work for that were not clear. They would give instructions, and you would have no idea what they just said. Their yeses weren't yes, their noes weren't noes, they weren't clear. And we have another principle of this in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 through 16. Now this is a little bit more of a more serious of a thing being spoken about. The principle is the same. And this is concerning the hot and the cold and the lukewarm. Know thy works. I said Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 through 16. Know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, so you're in a situation where you're neither hot nor cold, you art lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spew thee out of my mouth. So what God's saying is, I want you to be hot or cold. Don't be in the middle where I don't know what you are. And I think we need to be that way with speech. I think Christians should be bold in what they say. They need to be clear. Let their yeses be yes and their noes be noes. We don't need to be hem-hauling around with symbols and signs with our hands and our feet and winks. And we need to be clear. And I like people like that because they're transparent. I know where they're coming from. I don't have to sit around and wonder, that guy hem-hauls around on everything. I really don't know where he stands on anything. And I get irritated with some people. You'll be talking about what they believe on something, maybe something biblical, and you'll ask them and they won't answer. They could say, I just don't know, but they don't want to answer because they don't want to deal with it. But rather, they could just say yes or no and make it clear. Rather, you're like, well, he could have meant this or she could have meant that. And you end up with a conversation where you just have to wonder about it. And I don't think we should be that way. I think we should be clear. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 6 and we'll wrap this message up. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 15. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall be broken without remedy. And this is speaking of the wicked person before. So, I think this is important to remember because oftentimes today we think that the wicked are going to go on forever and that they're never going to have calamity that should come on them suddenly. Sometimes we feel like we're being beaten down all the time. But the wicked will have their day. The wicked will be broken. It says here, be broken without remedy, meaning you can't fix it. And I think it's important for Christians to understand and remember that the wicked are going to be punished for what they do. Now, we're going to read verse 16 through 19 real quick, but we're not going to cover all this in this passage, or this sermon. I'm going to read it, and then you all can look over it over the week, and we're going to touch on each of these points next week, because they're all way too important not to just to glance over. Verse 16. These 6 things doth the Lord hate. So we know we're talking about something real serious. And yet 7 are an abomination unto Him. Number 1, a proud look. Number 2, a lying tongue. Number 3, a hands that shed innocent blood. So we have haughtiness, proud, arrogance there in number 1. We have 2, lying, false accusing. Number 3, murder. And number 4 says here, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations. Number 5, feet that be swift in running to mischief. 6, a false witness that speaks lies. And 7, he that soweth discord among brethren. Now there's 7 things there that are very important, and we see them all among society today, but we see them in churches as well. Pride and lying is a big one. False accusing, he that soweth discord among the brethren, and ones who have wicked imaginations. Next week we'll go through each one of these parts, because there are things that we don't want to there are things we don't want to have found amongst us. We want to be fighting against it and making sure that none of the children here or us, or we don't have those things in our lives, because like it says here, the Lord hates them. And we don't want to be doing anything the Lord hates. So let's go ahead and let's bow our heads and close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this day. We thank you for this opportunity, Lord, to come together, Lord, and worship you, Lord, and read your word, Lord. And we just praise you and we thank you for all that you've given us, Lord. And let us have a better week, this upcoming week, than we did the last, Lord. Let us do better. Let us be better men and women of God, Lord. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.